I am Nia, 30 years old, and a forensic accountant who married into Atlanta's most powerful real estate dynasty. On what should have been the happiest day of my life, my husband's brother publicly fired me in front of 300 guests and smugly called it his wedding gift. Humiliated and surrounded by people waiting for me to break, I thought my life was unraveling. But an unexpected phone call from my bedridden father-in-law revealed a shocking truth that changed the balance of power in an instant. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever stood up to snobs who underestimated your worth. The crystal chandeliers of the Caldwell Estate Ballroom cast a golden glow over 300 of Atlanta's wealthiest socialites. Waiters in white tuxedos glided across marble floors, balancing silver trays of champagne. My custom silk wedding gown felt heavy, but Julian held my hand firmly under the table, his thumb tracing circles over my diamond ring. We had just finished our first dance and polite applause still echoed. This was the pinnacle of Black elite society. Mayors, judges, and corporate titans sat surrounding us, dripping in generational wealth and silent judgment. The jazz band was playing a soft tune when the piercing sound of a silver fork clinking against crystal shattered the ambiance. The music ground to a halt. Every face in the massive ballroom turned toward the head table. Desmond Caldwell, Julian's older brother, and the chief operating officer of Caldwell Holdings, slowly stood up. He adjusted the lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo with practiced grace. He grabbed the microphone, his face carrying that signature Caldwell smirk. Desmond was the golden child, the ruthless heir apparent to the commercial real estate empire, wearing his superiority like a loaded weapon. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," Desmond announced, his deep, resonant voice booming through the silent room. "I want to propose a very special toast to my little brother Julian and his lovely new bride Nia." He raised his glass high, but his eyes were entirely cold when they locked onto mine. "Julian, we all know you have always marched to the beat of your own drum, choosing a career in urban planning instead of joining the family in the corporate boardroom. And of course, choosing a wife from far outside our usual established circles." A low, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the older guests. "But family is family," Desmond continued, his tone dripping with fake sincerity. "And as the COO of Caldwell Holdings, I deeply believe in taking care of our own, ensuring that our legacy remains untarnished." Desmond took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne, relishing the captive audience. "Nia, you have worked hard as a lead auditor at our firm. But marriage into this family is a massive undertaking. Being a proper Caldwell wife requires dedication, social poise, and absolute focus. I want you to have all the free time in the world to support my brother and attend your new country club luncheons." He paused, leaning forward so his voice dropped into a mockingly gentle register that amplified through the speakers. "So effective immediately, I am officially terminating your position as lead auditor at Caldwell Holdings. Consider it my wedding gift to you." The ballroom plunged into a suffocating silence. A dropped fork clattered against a porcelain plate, sounding as loud as a gunshot. Julian shot up from his chair, his face flushed with sudden fury. He grabbed Desmond's arm, demanding to know what kind of sick joke this was. But Desmond simply shook him off, adjusting his cufflinks. He had actually done it. He had waited until the most public, vulnerable moment of my life to strip away the career I had built, from absolutely nothing. He expected me to cry. He expected me to run out of the ballroom in shame. From the VIP table just below the main stage, a sharp, cruel laugh pierced the heavy silence. It was Vanessa, Desmond's wife. She sat lounging in her emerald green Vera Wang dress, casually swirling her Dom Perignon. Vanessa came from a long, proud line of legacy wealth and had made it her personal daily mission to remind me of my working-class roots since the very day I met Julian. "Honestly, Julian, calm down," Vanessa called out, her voice intentionally loud enough for the first 5 rows of guests to hear clearly. Nia should be thanking Desmond on her knees. Her little public school degree from that HBCU was barely enough for the mailroom anyway. Now she can finally stop pretending she belongs in the corporate suite with the adults and focus on picking out window treatments. The whispers started instantly. Judgmental stares burned into my skin. I felt the collective pity of the Atlanta elite weighing me down. They saw a charity case being brutally put in her rightful place. But they did not know me. They did not know the girl who grew up pulling double shifts just to pay for accounting textbooks. They did not know the fiercely determined woman who passed her CPA exams on the first try while working full-time. I did not shed a single tear. My face remained a mask of absolute unbothered calm. I slowly stood up. The heavy silk of my wedding gown swept dramatically across the stage as I walked deliberately past Desmond. He smirked broadly, clearly assuming I was heading straight for the nearest exit to hide my tears. Instead, I walked straight down the short carpeted steps and approached the DJ booth. I reached out and took the secondary wireless microphone from the stand. The microphone hummed to life with a soft crackle. I turned to face the entire room, my eyes locking directly and fiercely onto Vanessa's smug, arrogant face. A public school degree. I repeated, my voice, steady, powerful, and echoing clearly through the massive ballroom without a single tremor. It is truly funny that you bring up my education tonight, Vanessa. I took a few slow steps toward her VIP table, commanding the undivided attention of every billionaire politician and socialite in the room. Because you see, that exact same degree is what I used late last Tuesday evening when I ran the quarterly forensic sweep on our corporate accounts. I found it quite interesting that the operating costs for your prestigious Women in Leadership charity gala were so massively over budget. Vanessa's smile faltered. Her white-knuckled grip on her champagne flute tightened. In fact, I continued projecting my voice, so it hit the back walls with devastating clarity. That little public school degree helped me trace exactly $2 million missing from the charity fund. I traced every single cent through 3 shell companies directly into your personal offshore account in the Cayman Islands, Vanessa. The collective gasp from the audience was absolutely deafening. Several wealthy, prominent donors sitting at the nearby tables physically recoiled, looking at Vanessa with sudden, naked disgust. Vanessa dropped her glass. The expensive crystal shattered instantly against the marble floor, spilling vintage champagne all over her designer shoes, her face drained of all color, shifting rapidly from arrogant mockery to sheer, unadulterated panic. "You are a liar!" she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly as she stood up, pointing a manicured finger at me. She is a jealous liar. Absolute chaos erupted in the ballroom. Desmond lunged forward aggressively to grab the microphone from my hands, but Julian stepped firmly and fiercely into his path, shoving his older brother back hard against the edge of the head table. "Do not even think about touching my wife," Julian roared, his fists clenched tight at his sides, ready to fight. Before Desmond could retaliate, Beatrice, my domineering mother-in-law, stormed the stage. Dressed in shimmering silver, she looked like an enraged queen. She pointed a trembling finger right at my face. "How dare you!" Beatrice screamed over the clamor of shocked guests. "You ungrateful, classless girl! You are ruining the family name in front of our investors. We took you in and you spout vicious lies to destroy my son's wife." "They are not lies. Beatrice and I have the secure bank routing numbers to prove every single word of it," I replied coldly, tossing the microphone onto the nearest table. The resulting feedback whined loudly, making people cover their ears. Security guards in dark suits rushed down the aisles, summoned by Desmond's frantic hand gestures. Guests stood up, arguing loudly, pulling out smartphones to record the unprecedented disaster unfolding before them. The perfect high society wedding had rapidly devolved into a corporate scandal of epic proportions. As Julian bravely braced himself to fight off the rapidly approaching security guards, a violent, persistent vibration buzzed against my leg. I reached into the hidden pocket sewn into the skirt of my bridal gown and pulled out my phone. The caller ID flashed brightly on the illuminated screen. It was Richard Caldwell, the founding patriarch of the real estate empire, my father-in-law, the exact same man who was supposedly locked away in a private medical facility, suffering from a severe illness that completely prevented him from attending his own son's wedding. His presence had been the looming shadow over this entire evening, his empty chair at the head table, a constant reminder of his supposed decline. Now his name illuminated my screen with a pulsing urgency. I stared down at the glowing device as the ballroom raged violently around me, my heart pounding in my chest. With Julian fending off the guards and Beatrice screaming for my immediate removal, I took a deep breath, steadied my trembling hand, and pressed my thumb down over the answer button. The chaotic noise of the room faded away as I raised the phone to my ear, waiting for his voice. The glass Vanessa threw shattered against the marble pillar inches from my head. I didn't flinch. My eyes remained fixed on Desmond as I lifted the vibrating phone to my ear. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the rising clamor of the ballroom. "Naya, get out of there now." My father-in-law's voice crackled through the receiver. There was no trace of the dementia Desmond had so publicly lamented. Richard sounded sharp, precise, and entirely lucid. "Desmond just triggered the corporate kill switch. He's trying to liquidate the holding accounts before the Vanguard merger. I'm sending you the master override codes. You have exactly 4 minutes before the transfer is irreversible." My blood ran cold, but my mind snapped into clinical focus. The $2 million missing from Vanessa's charity was just pocket change. Desmond was attempting to drain the entire Caldwell empire dry. "Received," I replied, feeling my phone buzz with the incoming encrypted file. "I'm on it." Desmond's triumphant smirk vanished the moment he heard his father's name. His eyes darted from me to the phone in my hand, realization dawning with sickening speed. He lunged across the stage, nearly knocking over a tiered floral arrangement. "Who is on that phone?" Desmond roared the microphone, amplifying his panic. "Give me that phone right now." I stepped back, my fingers flying across the screen as I opened the encrypted file Richard had sent. "Your father sends his regards, Desmond," I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "And he wants his company back." Desmond's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He turned to the perimeter of the room, raising a hand in a sharp, frantic motion. Instantly, the private security detail men built like linebackers in tailored suits moved into action. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut with a resounding thud. The metallic click of deadbolts turning echoed ominously. The murmurs of the 300 guests escalated into panicked shouts. "Nobody leaves," Desmond commanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. "And nobody touches that woman until I have her phone and her laptop." Julian finally broke through his shock. He stepped in front of me, shielding me from Desmond's advancing guards. "Have you lost your mind, Desmond?" Julian yelled, his voice rough with disbelief. "You're locking our guests in. You're threatening my wife." "She's a corporate spy, Julian," Beatrice shrieked, materializing beside Desmond. She clutched her pearls, her face pale beneath her immaculate makeup. "She's been stealing from us. Desmond is just protecting the family." "Protecting the family," I shot back, stepping out from behind Julian's protective stance. "Desmond is liquidating the company accounts as we speak. He's transferring the assets offshore." "Lies!" Vanessa screeched, her voice shrill and desperate. She pushed past a bewildered senator to stand beside her husband. "She's a gold digger. She planned this to ruin us." Desmond signaled 2 guards. "Get her phone, and send someone up to the bridal suite to secure her laptop. You aren't leaving this venue until you sign a full NDA and surrender your tech, Naya." He thought he had me cornered. He thought the intimidation tactics that had worked on his mother and his employees would work on me. He underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. I looked Desmond dead in the eye, my thumb hovering over the final command prompt on my screen. "I don't need the laptop, Desmond," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My software runs on a decentralized network. I just initiated a cloud sync." Desmond laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "A cloud sync to where? Your little home server?" "Directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission," I replied, pressing the execute button. "The audit logs, the offshore account routing numbers, the forged board resolutions, every single byte of data is currently uploading to a federal server." The color drained completely from Desmond's face. He looked as if I had just shot him. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft ping of my phone confirming the successful upload. "Get her!" Desmond screamed, his voice breaking in panic. "Detain her right now!" The two guards lunged. Julian moved faster. He intercepted the first guard, landing a solid punch that sent the man stumbling backward into a table of champagne flutes. Glass shattered, and the guests erupted into screams. The second guard grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. I didn't struggle. I turned my head, locking eyes with Beatrice, who was watching the scene with a mixture of horror and vindication. "Is this how you protect the family, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice rising above the chaos. "By letting your golden boy assault my husband and illegally detain me?" Beatrice flinched, but stood her ground. "Julian, stop this foolishness," she demanded, her voice trembling. "Desmond is trying to save us." I wrenched my arm free from the guard's loosened grip, taking advantage of his momentary hesitation as Julian tackled his partner. "Saving the family," I yelled, the adrenaline finally surging through my veins. "Just like you saved Julian from his college girlfriend, the one you paid $50,000 to disappear, the one you told Julian had cheated on him." Julian froze, the guard he was holding, slipping from his grasp. He turned slowly, his eyes wide and searching as he looked at his mother. "What did she just say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Beatrice took a step back, her hands fluttering nervously. "Julian, don't listen to her. She's trying to turn you against me." "I found the bank records, Beatrice," I continued, pressing the advantage. "A cashier's check drawn from the family trust, dated 3 days after Julian proposed to her. You couldn't control her, so you bought her out." Julian looked at his mother in absolute horror. The realization hit him like a physical blow, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of his family's benevolence. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a desperate question. I nodded once, confirming the devastating truth. "Julian, please," Beatrice pleaded, reaching out a hand. "I did it for you. She wasn't right for you. She didn't belong in our world." "And Naya does," Vanessa sneered from the stage, unable to resist a final jab. "A girl from the projects who wears a knockoff dress to her own wedding." I didn't bother responding to Vanessa. Her petty insults were irrelevant now. I turned my attention back to Desmond, who was furiously barking orders into his phone, likely trying to intercept the SEC upload. "It's too late, Desmond," I said calmly. "The file is encrypted and fragmented. You can't stop it." Desmond threw his phone to the ground, the screen shattering. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "You think you've won," he snarled. "You're nothing. You're a temporary glitch in this family's history." "I'm the glitch that just crashed your entire system," I replied. I grabbed Julian's hand. "We're leaving," I said. Julian didn't hesitate. He pulled me toward the service doors behind the stage, shoving past a bewildered caterer. The guard, still recovering from the brief scuffle, hesitated, unsure whether to follow Desmond's frantic orders or avoid further assault charges. We burst through the heavy doors and sprinted down the narrow service hallway. My wedding dress, heavy with silk and tulle, made running difficult, but I didn't slow down. We reached the service elevator, and Julian frantically pressed the call button. "Nia, is it true?" Julian asked, his voice shaking as we waited. "Did my mother really pay off Sarah?" "I'm sorry, Julian," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "I found the records last week. I was going to tell you, but then—" I gestured helplessly at my dress. The elevator doors opened and we rushed inside. Julian slammed his hand against the button for the parking garage. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sounds of the chaotic ballroom above. "I can't believe it," Julian whispered, leaning against the cold metal wall. "My whole life, my family, it's all a lie." "We'll figure it out," I assured him, though my own heart was hammering against my ribs. "We just need to get out of here and contact Richard." As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed with a new notification. I pulled it out, expecting a message from Richard confirming the override. Instead, the screen displayed a stark red alert from our joint banking app. "Account frozen. Please contact your financial institution." I quickly opened the app, my fingers flying across the screen. Every single account, our joint, checking our savings. Even the credit cards linked to the family trust showed a zero balance or a frozen status. "Julian," I said, my voice tight with sudden dread. Check your accounts. Julian pulled out his phone, his brow furrowing as he navigated the app. They're locked, he said, looking up at me in confusion. Desmond must have frozen them. He didn't just freeze them. I realized the full extent of Desmond's retaliation dawning on me. He locked us out of the corporate system. He controls the primary trust. My phone buzzed again. An email from our travel agent. Subject urgent. Flight cancellation. I opened the email, my stomach plummeting. Our honeymoon flights to Santorini, booked through the company's travel concierge, had been canceled. The reservations for the villa, the private tours, everything was gone. I looked at Julian, the reality of our situation settling over me like a suffocating blanket. We were standing in a service elevator in our wedding clothes, completely cut off from the family's resources, with zero access to our funds. Desmond hadn't just fired me. He had systematically stripped us of everything we needed to fight back. The elevator doors opened onto the dimly lit parking garage. We stepped out, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos upstairs. I clutched my phone, my mind racing through the limited options available to us. We were stranded, penniless, and hunted by a desperate man willing to destroy his own family to save himself. But as I looked at Julian, his face pale but resolute, I knew one thing for certain. Desmond had taken our money, but he hadn't taken my mind. And I was just getting started. Julian stared at his phone screen, the blue light reflecting off his shocked face in the dim parking garage. They froze everything, he muttered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. My personal checking, the trust disbursements, even the emergency credit lines. Desmond isn't playing a game, I said, my mind calculating our next move at lightning speed. He triggered the kill switch because he knows I have the evidence to put him away for federal fraud. He thinks freezing our assets will paralyze us. Before Julian could respond, the harsh wail of police sirens pierced the night air, growing rapidly closer to the estate gates. Red and blue lights began flashing against the manicured hedges lining the driveway. They called the cops! Julian realized, panic finally setting into his features. Desmond told the guards to detain you, but I threw the first punch. He's going to press assault charges to keep me tied up while he finishes liquidating the company. Julian, we need to move, I urged, grabbing his arm. No, he said, stepping back and shaking his head. If we both run, we look guilty. I need to stay. I need to talk to the police and explain what Desmond is doing. You have to get out of here with that data. If they take your phone, we lose our only leverage. I am not leaving you here to face Beatrice and Desmond alone, I argued fiercely. You have to, Julian insisted, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Nia, my mother, just admitted to ruining my life to control me. Desmond is trying to steal my father's legacy. I have to face them. You need to secure the SEC upload and stop the Vanguard merger. Go. I hated leaving him, but the flashing police lights were now sweeping into the upper levels of the parking structure. I pulled up a secondary banking app on my phone. When you grow up in a working-class neighborhood and fight your way into rooms full of billionaires, you learn to always keep a hidden safety net. I had a small private credit union account from my college days that Desmond's corporate tentacles could not reach. I quickly hailed a premium rideshare, setting the pickup location for the service exit at the rear of the estate. I will fix this, I told Julian, pressing a quick kiss to his lips. Do not let them get in your head. I hiked up the heavy silk layers of my wedding dress and sprinted toward the rear exit just as two police cruisers screeched to a halt near the main elevators. The black SUV idled by the service gate. I threw open the door and scrambled into the back seat, breathless. The driver, a kind-looking older man, glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes widening at my massive white gown and the sheer panic on my face. Take me to the private airfield at DeKalb Peachtree, I ordered, buckling my seatbelt. And please drive fast. As the SUV sped away from the Caldwell estate, my phone began vibrating continuously. It was not Richard with more instructions. It was an absolute avalanche of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and exclusive group chats. My battery was draining rapidly under the sheer volume of incoming vitriol. I opened Instagram and my stomach plummeted. Vanessa was broadcasting live to her 90,000 followers. She was sitting in the Caldwell Estate's lavish drawing room, her makeup expertly smudged to look like she had been crying for hours. She clutched a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the traumatized victim with Oscar-worthy precision. "I am just in shock," Vanessa sobbed into the camera, her voice trembling perfectly. "We welcomed Nia into our family with open arms. We gave her a beautiful wedding. And she repaid us by having a complete psychotic break right in the middle of the reception. She started screaming insane lies about our charities, trying to ruin my reputation because she has always been jealous of my background." She paused to dab her eyes, ensuring her diamond ring caught the light. "But the worst part is the corporate espionage. Desmond just discovered that Nia used her position to steal highly classified trade secrets from Caldwell Holdings. She married Julian just to get access to our servers. We are heartbroken, and we are working with federal authorities to track her down." I watched the viewer count skyrocket. The comments rolling in were vicious. Atlanta's elite society wives women, who had smiled in my face and drank my champagne just 2 hours ago, were tearing me apart. They called me a scammer, a hood rat, a criminal who had finally shown her true colors. My text messages were flooded with former friends and industry colleagues, demanding to know if I had lost my mind. The narrative was spinning out of control at terrifying speed. Desmond and Vanessa were orchestrating a masterclass in character assassination, ensuring that no firm in the country would ever hire me again. I closed the app and took a steadying breath. Let them talk. Let Vanessa play the victim. I had federal tracking codes syncing to the SEC and a much bigger target in my sights. Desmond needed Vanguard Group's capital to cover his massive embezzlement. If he successfully merged Caldwell Holdings with Vanguard tomorrow morning in Chicago, he would bury the stolen funds in a mountain of corporate restructuring. I had to kill that deal. My phone rang, cutting through the endless stream of hate messages. It was Julian. I answered immediately, the sounds of a busy police precinct echoing in the background. "Julian, are you okay? Did they arrest you?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "I am at the station," Julian said, his voice sounding hollow and exhausted. Desmond pressed aggravated assault charges. The guards claimed I attacked them unprovoked. The police aren't listening to anything I say about the corporate theft. They said it is a civil matter and I need a lawyer. "I will find a lawyer," I said quickly. "I have contacts who can arrange bail tonight." "Nia, listen to me." Julian interrupted, his tone shifting. There was a heavy silence on the line. "My mother is here." I felt a cold prickle of dread crawl up my spine. "What does Beatrice want?" I could hear the muffled sound of Beatrice's voice in the background, sharp and demanding, dictating terms to her son. When Julian spoke again, he sounded defeated. "She said Desmond will drop the assault charges completely. They will wipe the slate clean and clear my record, but only on one condition." He took a ragged breath. "She wants me to file for an annulment first thing in the morning, and she demands that I get you to bring your encrypted hard drives and your phone back to the family estate tonight." The absolute audacity of the Caldwell Matrix was staggering. They were holding Julian hostage, using his freedom to blackmail him into betraying me and surrendering the only evidence that could save Richard's company. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low, "they are manipulating you. They want the drives so they can destroy the evidence of Desmond's fraud. If you agree to an annulment, you are telling the world that Vanessa's Instagram lies are true. You are validating their smear campaign." "I know," Julian whispered miserably. "But Nia, I am looking at a felony charge. Desmond has the best defense attorneys in the state working against me right now. My mother is sitting right across from me, telling me that if I just hand over the drives, this all goes away. We can start over. Maybe she is right. Maybe we just walk away from Caldwell Holdings entirely." He was hesitating. The man I had just vowed to spend my life with, the man who had punched a guard to protect me, was cracking under the psychological weight of his mother's gaslighting. Beatrice had spent 30 years conditioning him to yield to the family's power, and those chains were incredibly hard to break. But I did not have the luxury of coddling his trauma. The clock was ticking. "Julian," I said, my voice hardening into steel, "I love you, but I refuse to be the scapegoat for your brother's crimes, and I refuse to let your mother dictate my worth. You either stand up to them now, or you belong to them forever." Nia, please just think about the charges, he pleaded. I stared out the window of the SUV, watching the streetlights blur past. I didn't marry a coward, I said coldly, and I hung up the phone. I wiped a single stray tear from my cheek and immediately dialed a new number. I needed a miracle, and I knew exactly where to find one. I called Marcus, a prominent venture capitalist and a proud fellow alumni from my HBCU. We had served on the alumni board together, and he owed me a massive favor after I caught a glaring tax error in his portfolio last year. He answered on the second ring. Nia, are you okay? The internet is going crazy right now. Is Vanessa telling the truth? Vanessa wouldn't know the truth if it bit her in her designer heels, I replied sharply. Marcus, I need you to cash in that favor. I need a private jet out of DeKalb Peachtree Airport in 20 minutes, and I need a flight path cleared straight to Chicago. Marcus let out a low whistle. Chicago in the middle of the night, Naya chartering a jet this late requires serious clearance. I know you have an aircraft sitting at the hangar, Marcus. I will pay you double the charter fee as soon as my assets are unfrozen. But if I do not get to the Vanguard Group headquarters by tomorrow morning, Desmond Caldwell is going to walk away with $1 billion merger built on stolen funds. Please. There was a brief pause followed by the sound of keys jingling. Consider it a wedding gift, Marcus said. Head to Hangar 4. The pilot will be waiting. The SUV pulled up to the private airfield just as Marcus promised. I thanked the driver, stepped out into the cool night air, and walked purposefully toward the waiting Gulfstream jet. I was still wearing my ruined wedding gown, its hem stained with spilled champagne and parking garage dirt. I had no luggage, no credit cards, and a husband sitting in a jail cell. The entire world thought I was a deranged criminal. But Desmond Caldwell had made one fatal miscalculation. He thought stripping me of the Caldwell name would render me powerless. He forgot that I was a force to be reckoned with long before I ever put on his family's ring. I climbed the stairs to the private jet, ready to bring an empire to its knees. Marcus, a prominent venture capitalist, and a proud fellow alumni from my HBCU had come through for me. We had served on the university alumni board together for years, and he owed me a massive professional favor after I caught a glaring multi-million-dollar tax error in his investment portfolio last spring. When I called him from the back of a rideshare 15 minutes ago, begging for immediate transport, he did not ask questions. I had flagged down the driver using a hidden emergency credit union account, speeding away from the Caldwell estate just as the police sirens began to wail in the distance. The ride to the airfield had been a blur of flashing streetlights and pure adrenaline. Now the heavy cabin door of the Gulfstream sealed shut behind me, locking out the humid Atlanta night. I collapsed into one of the plush cream leather seats. My custom silk wedding gown, the dress I had spent months dreaming about, was now torn at the hem and stained with grease from the parking garage floor. I kicked off my ruined designer heels and pressed my bare feet into the thick carpet. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, confirming our flight path to Chicago. We were cleared for takeoff. As the jet engines roared to life, the shock of my escape finally began to wear off, leaving behind a cold, calculating determination. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my dress and connected to the aircraft's secure Wi-Fi network. My screen instantly exploded. Thousands of notifications flooded my display, vibrating so aggressively my hands went numb. Missed calls, text messages, news alerts, and social media mentions piled up by the second. I tapped on a message from a woman I had considered a close professional mentor. The message simply read, "How could you do this to them?" Below, it was a link that opened directly to Instagram. Vanessa was broadcasting live. She was sitting in the Caldwell Estate's grand drawing room, framed by antique oil paintings and imported silk curtains. The lighting was perfectly dim, designed to highlight the strategic glistening tear rolling down her perfectly contoured cheek. She clutched a delicate lace handkerchief to her chest, playing the role of the traumatized victim with a level of skill that made me physically sick to my stomach. Over 40,000 people were watching the broadcast live. The viewer count was climbing by the second. I turned the volume up on my phone. Vanessa's voice trembled with fake manufactured grief. "We are just completely devastated," she sobbed into the camera, looking directly into the lens. "We welcomed Nia into our family with open arms. We gave her the wedding of her dreams. We treated her like a sister. And she repaid us by having a complete psychotic break right in the middle of the wedding reception." She paused to dab her eyes, ensuring her massive diamond engagement ring was perfectly visible to the camera. She started screaming insane, baseless lies about our family charities. Vanessa continued, her voice hitching perfectly. "She tried to ruin my reputation because she has always been deeply jealous of my background and my marriage to Desmond. But the absolute worst part is the corporate espionage." Vanessa leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice to a dramatic, confidential whisper. "Desmond just discovered that Nia used her position as an auditor to steal highly classified trade secrets from Caldwell Holdings. She married Julian just to get access to our secure servers. She is a corporate spy. We are heartbroken, and we are currently working with federal authorities to track her down and bring her to justice." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. The comments rolling in beneath Vanessa's video were vicious and relentless. Atlanta's elite society wives, women who had smiled in my face, complimented my hair, and drank my champagne just 2 hours ago, were actively tearing me apart in real time. The black elite social circles were closing ranks to protect their own. They called me a scammer. They called me a hood rat. They said I was a criminal who had finally shown her true colors. Money cannot buy class. One prominent judge's wife commented, a woman whose charity gala I had just attended last month. "We always knew she was trash," wrote another socialite, someone who had actively begged me for an invitation to the wedding. "Julian needs to annul this immediately," a local politician added. My text messages were a completely different kind of nightmare. Industry colleagues I had worked with for years were demanding to know if I had lost my mind. Board members from local charities I supported were telling me I was a total disgrace to the community. My phone was blowing up with hate messages actively canceling me before I even had a chance to defend myself. Desmond and Vanessa were orchestrating a masterclass in character assassination. They were ensuring that no accounting firm in the country would ever hire me again. They wanted me destitute, radioactive, and unemployable. I closed the Instagram app and took a slow, steadying breath. I refused to panic. I was a forensic accountant. I dealt in facts, data, and undeniable proof. Let them talk. Let Vanessa play the weeping victim for her followers. Let the socialites type their hateful comments. I had federal tracking codes syncing directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and a much bigger target waiting for me. Desmond needed the Vanguard Group's capital to cover his massive embezzlement. Vanguard was Caldwell Holdings' biggest rival, a massive commercial real estate firm, headquartered in a towering glass skyscraper in downtown Chicago. If Desmond successfully finalized a hostile takeover and merged the companies tomorrow morning, he would bury the stolen funds in a mountain of complex corporate restructuring. The missing millions would simply vanish into the administrative chaos of the merger, and Richard's legacy would be erased. I had to kill that deal before the ink dried. Suddenly, the screen of my phone shifted. An incoming call from an unknown local number overrode the flood of social media alerts. I answered immediately, pressing the phone to my ear. "Nia," a voice said. It was Julian. He sounded hollow, exhausted, and incredibly far away. "Julian, are you okay?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Did they arrest you?" "Where are you right now?" "I am at the downtown police precinct," Julian replied. The background noise was chaotic, filled with the harsh sounds of slamming doors, ringing telephones, and echoing voices of officers shouting orders. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the quiet luxury of the private jet. Desmond pressed aggravated assault charges against me. The private security guards gave sworn statements claiming I attacked them completely unprovoked. The police are not listening to anything I say about the corporate theft, the offshore accounts, or the locked doors at the reception. They told me it is a civil matter and that I need to call a lawyer. "I will find you a lawyer immediately," I said, my mind racing through my contacts. I know defense attorneys who can arrange bail tonight. Just do not say anything else to the police. Do not sign anything. Nia, listen to me. Julian interrupted. His tone shifted, dropping into a desperate, frightened register. My mother is here. I felt a cold prickle of dread crawl up my spine. What does Beatrice want? I could hear the muffled sound of Beatrice's voice in the background of his call. She sounded sharp, demanding, and utterly relentless. When Julian spoke again, his spirit sounded completely broken. She said, Desmond will drop the assault charges completely. Julian explained, his breathing shallow. They will wipe the slate clean. They will clear my record and make this all go away. But she only offered it on one condition. I waited, the silence stretching out between us as the jet banked through the night sky, soaring higher above the clouds. She wants me to file for an annulment first thing in the morning. Julian said, the words tumbling out of him like broken glass. And she demands that I get you to bring your encrypted hard drives and your phone back to the family estate tonight. She said if I do that, the family will protect me. She keeps telling me that Desmond is just trying to save our family from bankruptcy, that you are the one stealing from us. The absolute audacity of the Caldwell Matrix was staggering. They were holding Julian hostage, using his freedom to blackmail him into betraying me. They wanted him to surrender the only evidence that could save Richard's company and send Desmond to federal prison. They were using a mother's influence to force a son to destroy his own wife. Julian, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady, you know they are manipulating you. They want those drives so they can destroy the evidence of Desmond's fraud before the SEC finishes their review. If you agree to an annulment, you are telling the entire world that Vanessa's Instagram lies are true. You are validating their smear campaign. You are giving them exactly what they want. I know that, Nia, Julian whispered miserably. But I am looking at a felony charge. Desmond has the best defense attorneys in the state working against me right now to make sure this sticks. My mother is sitting right across from me, telling me that if I just hand over the drives, I do not have to go to prison. We can start over. Maybe she is right. Maybe we just walk away from Caldwell Holdings entirely and let them have it. He was hesitating. The man I had just vowed to spend the rest of my life with, the man who had punched a guard to protect my physical safety, was cracking under the psychological weight of his mother's gaslighting. Beatrice had spent 30 years conditioning him to yield to the family's power, and those chains were incredibly hard to break. He was terrified of losing his freedom, terrified of the relentless machine his family commanded. But I did not have the luxury of coddling his trauma. The clock was ticking, and the Vanguard executives in Chicago were waking up in a few hours to sign away Richard's legacy. I needed a partner, not a liability. Julian, I said, my voice hardening into absolute steel, I love you, but I refuse to be the scapegoat for your brother's crimes. And I refuse to let your mother dictate my worth or my future. You either stand up to them right now or you belong to them forever. Nia, please just think about the charges. He pleaded, his voice breaking. I cannot go to prison for this. I stared out the small oval window of the jet, watching the city lights of Atlanta fade into darkness below us. The choice was his, but the mission was mine. I didn't marry a coward, I said coldly. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I did not wait for his answer. I did not wait for his excuses. I powered off the device, cutting the connection to the hate, the lies, and the fear. I turned to the flight attendant, who had just entered the cabin holding a silver tray. Tell the pilot to maximize our speed, I instructed her. We have a hostile takeover to stop in Chicago. The flight to Chicago took less than 2 hours, but I spent every minute compiling the fragmented data files into a streamlined, undeniable presentation. When the Gulf Stream touched down at Midway International Airport, the sun was just beginning to crack the horizon, casting a cold, gray light over the city. I stepped off the tarmac and into a waiting black sedan Marcus had arranged. I caught my reflection in the tinted window of the car. My hair was pulled back into a severe bun. My white silk wedding dress was still stained and heavy, but I had found a sharp black tailored blazer in the jet's cabin closet. Slipping it on over the bridal gown transformed the look from a ruined bride into something entirely different. I looked like a woman going to war. The Vanguard Group occupied the top 4 floors of a towering glass skyscraper in the Loop. Because I was still officially listed as the lead external auditor for Caldwell Holdings, my security credentials granted me direct access to the executive elevators. The ride to the 65th floor was silent. The door slid open to reveal a sprawling, hyper-modern reception area. I bypassed the bewildered receptionist, my heavy silk skirt swishing aggressively against the polished marble floor. I knew exactly where the primary boardroom was located. The heavy mahogany double doors stood at the end of the corridor. I did not knock. I placed both hands on the brass handles and shoved them open with enough force to make them slam against the interior walls. The room froze. Desmond sat at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, a smug smile wiped instantly from his face. Beside him sat Vanessa, clutching a platinum pen wearing a pristine emerald green power suit. Lined up along the sides of the table were 5 high-ranking Vanguard executives, including their notoriously ruthless CEO, Harrison Vance. Spread out before them were the final merger documents. The ink was quite literally waiting to be applied. They were selling Richard's entire life's work out from under him. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent room. I stepped fully into the boardroom, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind me. I apologize for the dramatic attire, but as Desmond can attest, I had a rather abruptly canceled wedding reception to attend last night. Vanessa was the first to recover. She shot out of her leather ergonomic chair, her face a mask of manufactured horror. "How did you get past security?" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Desmond, call building management right now. She is stalking us." Desmond let out a harsh, patronizing laugh, quickly turning to the Vanguard CEO. He leaned casually on the table, attempting to exude an aura of unbothered control. "Harrison, I am so incredibly sorry for this disruption. This is exactly what I was explaining to you during our preliminary dinner. This is Nia. She is a recently terminated, highly disgruntled ex-employee of Caldwell Holdings. As you can see by her outfit, she had a severe public mental breakdown yesterday evening." Harrison Vance frowned, his sharp eyes raking over my blazer and stained silk gown. "Desmond, we are in the middle of closing a $2 billion acquisition. Why is an unstable former auditor interrupting my boardroom?" "She is mentally unwell, Harrison," Vanessa chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She has been stalking our family and stealing company data to fuel these paranoid delusions. We have already contacted the authorities in Atlanta. She is just acting out because Desmond caught her embezzling." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked straight toward the front of the room where the master media console was located. Desmond's private security detail stepped forward, but I shot them a glare so frigid they hesitated. That hesitation was all I needed. "I am not here to discuss my mental health, Desmond," I said, pulling the encrypted flash drive from my blazer pocket. "I am here to save Vanguard Group from acquiring a massive federal liability." "Do not let her touch that console," Desmond barked, his calm facade finally cracking. "Grab her. Touch me and I will have you charged with assault before this meeting is over." I warned the guards, slamming the flash drive into the USB port. I bypassed the Vanguard security protocols using a backdoor bypass I had coded on the flight. Instantly, the massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room flickered to life. "Harrison," I said, looking directly at the Vanguard CEO, "Desmond is selling you Caldwell Holdings at a 20% discount. I assume you thought it was a steal. You thought Richard Caldwell's failing health created a leadership vacuum that you could exploit. But you are not buying a distressed asset. You are buying a crime scene." I tapped the keypad, bringing up the first slide. It displayed a complex branching schematic of offshore financial entities. "Lies!" Vanessa screamed, stepping toward the screen. "Harrison turned that off. She fabricated those documents." "This is a live, verified pull from the Caldwell Holdings secure ledger," I stated, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "As of midnight, I initiated a direct sync with the Securities and Exchange Commission. What you are looking at is a money laundering network. Over the past 14 months, Desmond has systematically drained $90 million from the Caldwell primary operating accounts." The boardroom erupted into chaos. 2 of the Vanguard executives stood up, their faces pale. Harrison Vance held up a hand, silencing his team, his eyes locked on the screen. Show me the routing, Harrison demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Gladly, I replied. I tapped the screen again. The schematic zoomed in, highlighting 3 specific holding companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The funds were siphoned out under the guise of fake vendor invoices for the new downtown commercial development, but the money did not go to construction firms. I pulled up the registration documents for the offshore accounts. The corporate officers were listed clearly on the screen. The funds went directly to these 3 shell companies. I explained, tracing the digital paper trail. Companies entirely owned and operated by Vanessa Caldwell. Every eye in the room snapped to Vanessa. The color drained completely from her perfectly contoured face. She stumbled back a step, bumping into the edge of the conference table. That is illegal, one of the Vanguard lawyers sputtered, quickly pulling his copy of the merger agreement away from Desmond. If we sign these documents, Vanguard assumes all liability for the missing funds. We would be actively acquiring a federally investigated money laundering operation. Exactly, I said, folding my arms across my tailored blazer. Desmond is pushing this rapid merger because he needs Vanguard's massive liquidity to cover the $90 million he stole. Once your capital mixes with Caldwell's accounts, the federal audit trail becomes infinitely harder to untangle. He is using your company as a washing machine. Desmond, Harrison Vance growled, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. What is this? Is she telling the truth? I looked at Desmond, fully expecting to see him defeated, panicking, or begging for mercy. I expected him to scramble to throw Vanessa under the bus, or to try and run. He did none of those things. Desmond slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He calmly adjusted his cuffs, entirely unfazed by the catastrophic financial data glowing on the screen behind him. A slow, chillingly arrogant smile spread across his face. It is a very impressive presentation, Nia, Desmond said, his voice dripping with condescension. You always were incredibly good with spreadsheets. It is a shame you lack a basic understanding of corporate law. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document bound in a blue backing. He tossed it onto the center of the obsidian table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. Harrison, please ignore this dramatic display, Desmond said, gesturing casually to the document. What you are looking at on that screen is not money laundering. It is a series of highly classified, completely legal private asset transfers initiated by the founder of the company, my father, Richard Caldwell. I frowned, my eyes darting to the document on the table. Richard would never authorize those transfers. You forged his signature. Desmond's smile widened, showing all his teeth. I did not forge anything, and Richard did not authorize the transfers himself. I authorized them on his behalf. Desmond tapped the blue-backed document. This is a comprehensive, irrevocable power of attorney, signed by a federal judge and certified by the state medical board yesterday afternoon. As of 24 hours ago, Richard Caldwell has been declared legally incapacitated due to advanced aggressive dementia. The breath left my lungs in a sharp rush. Desmond had completely bypassed the board of directors. He had weaponized his father's fake medical diagnosis to seize absolute control. My father is no longer fit to manage his own finances or his company, Desmond announced to the boardroom, feigning a look of deep filial sorrow. As his eldest capable son, I have been granted full legal proxy over all of his shares, all of his personal accounts, and all executive decision-making power for Caldwell Holdings. I moved those funds to Vanessa's offshore accounts to protect my father's assets from predatory employees exactly like Nia. He turned to Harrison Vance, exuding total confidence. The merger is legal, Harrison. The transfers are legal. I am the sole governing authority of Caldwell Holdings. This woman is a corporate terrorist who just unlawfully accessed our servers. Desmond pointed a finger directly at my chest, his eyes flashing with victorious malice. Security, detain her immediately, and call the Chicago Police Department. I want her arrested right now for corporate espionage and federal cyber trespassing. The Vanguard security guards exchanged uncertain glances, their hands hovering over their communication radios. Harrison Vance remained perfectly still at the head of the obsidian table, his sharp eyes darting between Desmond's triumphant sneer and my unyielding stance. Before the private guards could take a single step toward me, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open for a second time. Two men in dark, conservatively cut suits stepped into the room. Their demeanor was entirely different from the building's private security detail. They carried an air of absolute, unquestionable authority. The taller of the two men reached into his breast pocket and produced a gold badge, holding it up for the entire room to see. "Special Agent Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We received an urgent tip from the legal counsel representing Caldwell Holdings regarding a high-level cyber breach and active corporate espionage." Desmond's chest puffed out. He casually adjusted his silk tie, casting a sickeningly smug look at Vanessa, who practically vibrated with vindictive joy in her emerald green power suit. "Excellent response time, Agent Miller," Desmond said smoothly, stepping around the conference table. "That is the woman you are looking for. She used stolen credentials to unlawfully access our proprietary servers. She is currently holding a stolen drive containing highly sensitive corporate data, and she is attempting to use it to extort this merger." Agent Miller turned his cold, unreadable gaze toward me. His partner, a solidly built man who identified himself as Agent Reyes, stepped to my left, effectively cutting off my access to the boardroom exit. "Ma'am, step away from the media console," Agent Miller instructed, holding his hand out. "I need you to surrender that encrypted drive immediately." I did not move an inch. My fingers remained firmly planted on the keyboard of the master console. My ruined silk wedding dress pooled around my feet, but beneath the sharp lines of the tailored black blazer I had found on the jet, I felt invincible. "Agent Miller, the data on this drive is currently uploading to a secure server at the Securities and Exchange Commission." I replied, my voice steady, despite the rapid pounding of my heart. "It details a $90 million embezzlement scheme orchestrated by Desmond Caldwell." "That is a desperate lie from a mentally unstable former employee," Vanessa snapped, stepping out from behind Desmond. "She is a criminal. Arrest her and confiscate that drive before she damages our company's infrastructure any further." "Ma'am, this is a federal investigation now," Agent Reyes said, taking another deliberate step closer to me. "Surrender the drive, or we will be forced to physically detain you for obstruction and cyber theft." "It is not theft if you own the architecture," I stated, locking eyes with the federal agents. I refused to back down. I turned my attention back to the keyboard and executed a rapid sequence of commands. The massive 80-inch screen behind me shifted instantly. The complex financial routing diagrams and Cayman Island shell companies vanished. In their place, a dense cascading wall of raw, neon green source code flooded the display. 15 years ago, a corrupt property developer bankrupted my father's construction firm. I said, my voice projecting across the dead-silent boardroom. I kept my eyes fixed on the agents, ensuring they heard every single syllable. "That developer used a labyrinth of dummy corporations and hidden offshore accounts to hide his stolen assets. The system was entirely rigged against working-class men like my father. He lost his business, his savings, and his health fighting a phantom he could not track." I took a step away from the console, gesturing to the scrolling code on the monitor. "I promised myself I would never let another corporate predator hide behind digital walls," I declared. "So I built this forensic software from scratch. It is designed to trace dirty money through any firewall, any encryption, and any offshore cloaking mechanism in existence. And most importantly, it is registered exclusively to me, not to Caldwell Holdings, not to Desmond Caldwell. The proprietary rights belong entirely to Nia Caldwell." I tapped a final key, bringing up the official United States Patent and Trademark Office registration overlay superimposed directly over the source code. My name was highlighted in stark, undeniable white text. "I am not stealing company property," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the skyscraper. "I am utilizing my own legally patented forensic tool to expose a massive financial crime. If you seize this drive, you are interfering with a whistleblower's active submission to the federal government." Desmond laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. "Do not listen to this garbage," he sneered, though a fine sheen of sweat had finally broken out on his forehead. "She built that software while under contract with my company. That makes it Caldwell property. Confiscate the drive, Agent Miller. But Agent Miller was not looking at Desmond. He had stepped closer to the screen, his eyes scanning the intricate cascading lines of code. The rigid, authoritative set of his shoulders suddenly shifted. He tilted his head, his brow furrowing in deep concentration as he tracked the algorithmic sequences. He recognized the architecture. Agent Reyes, hold your position, Miller commanded quietly, holding up a hand to physically stop his partner. What are you doing? Vanessa demanded, her voice pitching into a shrill, panicked register. She is a criminal. Take her drive. Miller completely ignored her. He looked from the screen down to me, a new level of respect and intense calculation settling into his eyes. This is a closed-loop heuristic tracing algorithm, he said, his voice dropping an octave. We use a heavily modified version of this exact architecture in the Treasury Department's Anti-Terrorism Financial Task Force. This is federal-grade tracking software. I know, I replied smoothly. I leased a simplified version of it to the Department of Defense 3 years ago to pay off my student loans. Harrison Vance, the Vanguard CEO, let out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as he looked at Desmond with absolute contempt. Well, Desmond, Harrison said, his voice dripping with icy amusement. It appears your disgruntled, mentally unstable former employee is actually a federal software contractor. I am beginning to think your story has a few critical holes. Desmond's face flushed a dark, furious red. He opened his mouth to argue, to deploy another legal threat, or to wave his fraudulent power of attorney document in the air again. But before he could utter a single word, the heavy boardroom doors swung open for a third time. The sound of sharply clicking heels echoed against the marble floor. I turned, expecting to see Vanguard security moving in to clear the room. Instead, the breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. Beatrice Caldwell walked into the Chicago boardroom. She was immaculate. Her silver hair was styled into a flawless bob, and she wore a tailored slate-gray suit that exuded generational wealth and absolute power. She did not look like a woman who had spent the night negotiating in a gritty Atlanta police precinct. She looked like a queen arriving to execute a traitor. Flanking her on either side were 3 of Caldwell Holdings' most ruthless corporate litigators, men carrying thick leather briefcases packed with legal ruin. She had flown in on a separate private jet, chasing me across the country to protect her golden child. Desmond let out a massive sigh of relief, his arrogant smirk instantly returning. "Mother," he breathed. "Thank God, show them." Beatrice did not look at her son. She did not acknowledge Harrison Vance or the FBI agents. Her eyes locked directly onto me. The sheer, unadulterated malice in her gaze was enough to freeze blood. She stopped at the end of the obsidian table, her posture rigidly perfect. "I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen," Beatrice said, her voice smooth-cultured and utterly deadly. "My son Desmond is entirely correct. This woman is a dangerous criminal, and she has been manipulating our family for months." She reached out her hand, and one of her lawyers immediately placed a single sheet of paper into her palm. The document bore the official seal of the Atlanta Police Department and the distinct bold header of a sworn legal affidavit. "Nia has spun a very compelling, highly technical lie to hide her own tracks," Beatrice announced, holding the paper up for the room to see. "But the truth is much simpler. She is a common thief." I stared at the document in her hand, my heart slamming violently against my ribs. "What is that, Beatrice?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "More forged documents, more fake medical records to steal Richard's legacy." Beatrice smiled, a thin, cruel curving of her lips. "This is a sworn confession," she stated clearly. "Signed and dated just 2 hours ago in the presence of our legal counsel and Georgia law enforcement." She took a deliberate step toward the federal agents, handing the document directly to Agent Miller. "This is a full, legally binding confession signed by my youngest son, Julian Caldwell," Beatrice declared, her voice ringing with triumphant finality. "In it, Julian admits that he discovered his wife's financial crimes last night. He states under oath that Nia acted entirely alone in embezzling $90 million from Caldwell Holdings, and that she manufactured the evidence against Desmond to cover her own tracks." Agent Miller accepted the blue-backed document from Beatrice Caldwell with practiced clinical detachment. He did not immediately hand it to his partner. Instead, he flipped open the heavy cover, his eyes scanning the first page. The silence in the Vanguard boardroom was absolute, broken only by the hum of the climate control system and the sharp rhythmic tapping of Vanessa's acrylic nails against the obsidian table. Beatrice stood tall, radiating supreme aristocratic arrogance. She adjusted the lapels of her slate-gray suit, casting a look of pure venomous triumph in my direction. As you can clearly see, Agent Miller, my daughter-in-law, is a pathological liar, Beatrice stated, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She has orchestrated this entire spectacle to deflect from her own criminal activities. Julian has provided a full, sworn statement detailing exactly how Nia manipulated his access codes to steal from our family. I expect her to be placed in handcuffs immediately. Desmond leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long, dramatic breath of relief. He shot a smug, knowing look at Harrison Vance, attempting to re-establish his position as the victimized corporate leader. Vanessa smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. They believed the game was won. They believed Beatrice had successfully deployed the ultimate Caldwell weapon, total familial subjugation. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Beatrice. I reached into the pocket of my tailored black blazer, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen. "You always did underestimate your son, Beatrice," I said quietly, my voice carrying effortlessly across the tense room. I connected my phone to the boardroom's master media console using a secure wireless bridge. I pressed a single button. Instantly, the massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room split perfectly down the middle. On the left side, my neon green forensic tracking code continued to scroll, locking onto Desmond's offshore shell companies. On the right side, a high-definition video call initiated. The sharp digital ringing sound echoed loudly through the boardroom speakers. Vanguard executives exchanged bewildered glances. Agent Miller looked up from the document in his hands, his brow furrowing. Beatrice frowned, her perfect posture stiffening as the video feed connected. The screen flickered and Julian's face appeared in brilliant, towering high definition. He was not sitting in the sterile concrete interrogation room at the Atlanta Police Precinct. He was sitting in a deeply familiar, richly appointed room lined with towering oak bookshelves and dark oil paintings. He was sitting behind a massive antique mahogany desk. It was Richard Caldwell's private study at the family estate. Julian looked exhausted, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but his eyes were blazing with a sharp, undeniable clarity I had never seen in him before. Beatrice gasped, a harsh, entirely unscripted sound that tore from her throat. She took an involuntary step back, nearly colliding with one of her expensive corporate litigators. "Julian?" Beatrice demanded, her voice losing its cultured smoothness, pitching upward in shock. "What are you doing? Why are you not at the precinct with the lawyers? Why are you sitting in your father's study?" Julian looked directly into the camera lens, his gaze seemingly piercing through the screen to lock onto his mother. He did not look like the compliant, traumatized son who had hesitated on the phone with me hours ago. He looked like a man who had finally shattered his own chains. "Hello, Mother," Julian said, his voice ringing through the Chicago boardroom speakers, deep and perfectly steady. "I am in Dad's study because I am currently speaking with Dad. He is sitting right across from me. And strangely enough, for a man you and Desmond declared legally incapacitated with aggressive dementia yesterday afternoon, he seems completely lucid. In fact, he is furious." Desmond shot out of his leather chair as if he had been physically struck. "Turn that off," he roared, pointing frantically at the screen. "Harrison, this is a deepfake. This is AI manipulation. Turn the screen off right now." Harrison Vance ignored him entirely. The Vanguard CEO sat back, steepled his fingers, and watched the broadcast with the intense fascination of a predator watching a rival pack tear itself apart. Beatrice ignored Desmond's outburst. Her eyes remained glued to the monitor, her face contorting with a desperate, furious need to regain control. "Julian, stop this foolishness immediately," she ordered, utilizing the sharp disciplinary tone she had undoubtedly used to control him since childhood. "I personally watched you sign the confession at the police station. Our lawyers witnessed it. You signed the affidavit naming Naya as the sole embezzler. I handed the document to the FBI myself just 2 minutes ago. Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. It was a sound devoid of any warmth, carrying the heavy weight of a son, realizing the absolute depth of his mother's betrayal. Mom, did you really think I wouldn't read the paperwork? Julian asked, his voice echoing with devastating finality. Did you honestly believe I would blindly sign away my wife's freedom just because you told me to? Beatrice froze. The silence in the room became thick, heavy, and suffocating. I didn't sign a confession, Julian stated, pronouncing every word with deliberate, piercing clarity. When your lawyers handed me that stack of documents at the precinct, my own attorney arrived. We swapped the signature pages. I signed a forensic release form authorizing the FBI to audit your personal accounts, Mother. Every single one of them. Beatrice turned completely ghost white. The blood drained from her face so rapidly I thought she might collapse. She reached out, gripping the edge of the obsidian conference table to steady herself. Her 3 corporate litigators immediately broke ranks, surging forward to crowd around Agent Miller, frantically trying to view the document they had just handed to a federal agent. Agent Miller did not resist. He turned the document around, holding it up by the edges for the lawyers to see. Mr. Caldwell is entirely correct, Agent Miller announced, his voice carrying a note of grim amusement. This is not a sworn confession of embezzlement. This is a standard, fully executed federal consent waiver. It grants the Federal Bureau of Investigation total, unmitigated access to all domestic and international financial accounts registered to Beatrice Caldwell, effective immediately. No, Vanessa whispered, her hands flying to her mouth in genuine horror. Beatrice, what did you do? You lied to me for my entire life, Mom, Julian continued from the screen, his voice raw but unwavering. You paid $50,000 to ruin my first real relationship because you couldn't control it. You told me I was crazy. You told me I was the problem. You sat in a police station and tried to blackmail me into sending my innocent wife to federal prison just to protect Desmond's crimes. You used my love for this family as a weapon against me. Julian leaned closer to the camera. I am done protecting this family. Richard is revoking the fraudulent power of attorney right now. The medical board is already investigating the doctor who signed the incapacity evaluation. It is over. The Vanguard executives immediately began packing up their briefcases. The grand $2 billion merger was disintegrating before their eyes. Harrison Vance stood up, adjusting his suit jacket with brisk professional finality. Agent Miller, Agent Reyes, Harrison said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he had previously shown Desmond. Vanguard Group will provide any security footage or boardroom audio you require for your investigation. We formally withdraw our acquisition offer for Caldwell Holdings. We have no interest in doing business with a criminal syndicate. Vance did not look at Desmond as he led his team toward the boardroom doors. The rejection was absolute. Beatrice stood paralyzed, her hands trembling violently against the table. Her carefully constructed empire, the legacy she had compromised every moral boundary to protect, was burning to ash. Her lawyers were already stepping away from her, quietly speaking rapidly into their cell phones, desperately trying to distance themselves from the impending federal fallout. I looked at Desmond. The arrogant, untouchable heir to the Caldwell fortune was gone. His face was a sickly pale gray. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from the federal agents to the exit to his mother, and finally to the massive screen displaying the forensic tracking code that was currently dismantling his offshore accounts. Desmond realized with brutal, crushing clarity that he had completely lost. Julian had turned against the family matrix. The Vanguard merger was dead. The SEC was currently receiving a live feed of his embezzlement. His mother's leverage was gone, and the FBI was standing less than 10 feet away. Desmond panicked. He took 3 rapid steps backward, putting physical distance between himself and Agent Miller. He reached into his suit jacket with lightning speed and pulled out a secondary encrypted smartphone. It was not his standard corporate device. It was a thick, ruggedized mobile terminal. Desmond put the phone down. Agent Reyes warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. Desmond did not listen. His thumbs flew across the screen with desperate, frantic urgency. He was not trying to save the company anymore. He was trying to save himself. If I cannot have this company, nobody will. Desmond snarled, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria. He looked directly at me, his eyes wide and manic. You think you won, Nia? You think you saved Julian's precious inheritance? I control the master routing codes. I control the root access to the Caldwell Liquid Trust. My blood ran completely cold. The Liquid Trust was the family's emergency financial reserve. It contained hundreds of millions of dollars in highly liquid, untethered assets designed to keep the company solvent during catastrophic market crashes. It was the bedrock of the entire Caldwell empire. Desmond, stop! Beatrice shrieked, finally snapping out of her paralyzed shock. She lunged toward him, her arms outstretched. What are you doing? That is our survival fund. Desmond, do not touch that money. You failed mother. Desmond screamed back at her, sidestepping her grasp. Julian betrayed us, and Richard is going to strip me of everything. I am not going to federal prison empty-handed. He violently tapped the execute button on his screen. I just initiated a total irreversible liquidation protocol, Desmond announced, holding the phone up like a detonator. Every single dollar in the Caldwell Trust is currently scattering across a decentralized network of untraceable crypto wallets. The company is bankrupt. The family is bankrupt. Enjoy the ashes, Nia. He turned on his heel and bolted toward the secondary service doors at the back of the boardroom. It was a scorched earth move of unprecedented proportions. Desmond had just financially annihilated his entire family to create enough chaos to secure his own escape. Agent Reyes immediately unclipped his radio, shouting a rapid-fire pursuit code into the receiver as he sprinted after Desmond. His heavy boots thudded loudly against the polished marble floor. The heavy service doors slammed shut behind him temporarily, cutting off the sound of the chase. Inside the executive boardroom, the stunned silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds before the digital apocalypse began. Vanguard's proprietary trading terminals, which had been synced to the main presentation feed to monitor the Caldwell assets during the merger, instantly detected the catastrophic asset dump. Piercing, high-pitched sirens blared from the boardroom's integrated security speakers. The massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room shifted abruptly. The neon green of my forensic tracking software was overridden by a violent, strobing crimson red. Warning banners cascaded across the screen, stacking over one another in a rapid-fire sequence of financial death. The screen displayed the live status of the Caldwell Liquid Trust, a foundational account holding over $600 million in highly diversified assets. It was bleeding out in real time. The numbers spun backwards so fast they became a continuous blur. Hundreds of millions of dollars were being fractured, shredded into untraceable microtransactions, and funneled out into a decentralized network of anonymous offshore crypto wallets. Desmond had triggered a sophisticated self-destruct sequence, a protocol clearly designed months in advance to bypass every failsafe the holding company possessed. As the trust balance plummeted towards zero, a secondary, deeper alarm sounded through the speakers. A massive pop-up window dominated the center of the display. It was an automated system override originating directly from the Caldwell holding banks. With the liquid trust entirely drained, the debt-to-asset ratio of Caldwell Holdings instantly inverted. The banking system immediately registered the company as critically insolvent. The screen flashed the words, "Margin call initiated," in massive block letters. Because the underlying collateral was gone, the automated banking algorithms instantly moved to seize all physical assets tied to the Caldwell name to cover the massive deficit. The sprawling family estate in Atlanta, the fleet of private jets, the corporate high-rises, the luxury vehicles, and the private investment portfolios were all instantly locked, frozen, and slated for federal auction. Beatrice Caldwell stood completely paralyzed, her aristocratic composure shattering into a million jagged pieces. The slate-gray designer suit suddenly looked like a ridiculous costume on a terrified, broken woman. Her personal cell phone began to ring, a harsh, demanding vibration echoing from her pocket. She fumbled to retrieve the device, her hands shaking violently. I could hear the frantic, panicked voice of her private wealth manager bleeding through the receiver before she even managed to lift it to her ear. The realization hit her with the physical force of a freight train. The money was gone. The generational legacy was erased. She was entirely destitute. Beatrice let out a guttural, suffocating gasp. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the hard marble floor of the Vanguard boardroom. As she hit the ground, her exclusive custom-made Hermes handbag slipped from her grasp. The gold clasp snapped open upon impact, spilling her pristine life across the floor. Gold-embossed country club membership cards, diamond-studded compacts, and platinum credit cards that were now effectively useless scattered across the polished stone. She did not try to gather her belongings. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, crawling across the floor toward me. The woman who had spent years treating me like an infectious disease, the woman who had just attempted to frame me for a $90 million federal crime, was now looking up at me with thick black mascara streaming down her perfectly powdered cheeks. She reached out and grasped the hem of my ruined silk wedding dress, her knuckles white with desperation. "Nia, you have to stop it." Beatrice begged, her voice a hysterical, breathless screech. She pointed a trembling finger toward the flashing red monitor. "You built that tracking software. You know how to trace the money. You know how to hack the mainframes. You can override his command. You can freeze the wallets before the transfers clear." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman clawing at my feet. "Please, Nia." Beatrice sobbed, her voice echoing off the glass walls entirely devoid of her usual cultured superiority. "Do not let him do this. If that margin call executes fully, we are ruined. We will lose our country club memberships. We will lose the ancestral home. We will lose our private security, our cars, everything. You cannot let this happen. You are family." I stared down at her, processing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words. She had just marched into a boardroom with a forged confession designed to lock me in a federal penitentiary for decades. She had blackmailed her own son, preying on his loyalty to secure her own survival. She had orchestrated a vicious social smear campaign to ensure I would never work in my industry again. And now, as the inevitable consequences of her own blind arrogance tore her empire apart, she dared to invoke the word family. She dared to mourn her country club status while her eldest son fled a federal indictment. I gently but firmly pulled the stained silk fabric of my wedding dress out of her desperate grip. I took a single step back, severing the physical connection between us. I looked down at her tear-streaked face, my expression entirely devoid of sympathy, anger, or pity. I felt nothing but a cold, absolute clarity. "Family doesn't ask you to sit at a different table," I stated, my voice perfectly level, carrying the heavy weight of years of quiet endurance. I gestured toward the scattered, useless platinum credit cards on the floor. "Try Uber, Beatrice." The word struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, uncontrollable sobs. But while Beatrice broke under the weight of her reality, Vanessa ignited. Vanessa had been standing near the edge of the obsidian conference table, watching her entire universe collapse in real time. Her secret offshore shell companies had been exposed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The massive $2 billion Vanguard merger was officially dead. Her husband had just abandoned her to face federal charges alone, taking whatever crypto assets he managed to steal with him. She was facing decades in federal prison, and the unlimited wealth she had married into had evaporated in front of her eyes. She realized with terrifying clarity that she was the designated scapegoat. She had nothing left to lose, and the aristocratic mask she wore so carefully completely disintegrated. A low, animalistic scream tore from Vanessa's throat. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She kicked off her emerald green designer heels and leaped directly onto the massive obsidian conference table. Vanguard executives scattered in panic, diving out of their expensive leather chairs as Vanessa charged across the polished surface. She kicked over crystal water pitchers and scattered the blue-backed legal documents into the air, her eyes locked dead on me. She lunged off the edge of the table, her hands outstretched like claws aiming directly for my throat. She intended to physically tear me apart right in the middle of the boardroom. I braced myself, shifting my weight to intercept her attack, my hands coming up in a firm defensive guard. Agent Miller shouted a harsh warning, stepping rapidly forward to intercept her trajectory. But just as Vanessa's manicured hands reached for the lapels of my tailored black blazer, a thunderous noise stopped the chaos cold. The heavy oak double doors of the boardroom swung violently open, crashing against the interior walls with a deafening boom. Vanessa froze in midair, her momentum halting as every single person in the room turned toward the entrance. Standing in the threshold was Richard Caldwell. He was not the incapacitated, dementia-riddled invalid Desmond and Beatrice had painted him to be. He was standing tall, leaning heavily on a solid brass-tipped cane, dressed in a sharp, immaculate midnight blue suit. His eyes were clear, incredibly sharp, and burning with a completely lucid, terrifying authority. Flanking him on either side, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts, were four heavily armed United States federal marshals. Desmond sprinted for the heavy frosted glass of the secondary service doors at the rear of the executive boardroom. He moved with the desperate, uncoordinated speed of a man who had never faced a physical consequence in his entire life. He did not make it halfway across the room. Agent Reyes moved with the explosive trained velocity of a federal operative. He hit Desmond square between the shoulder blades, driving him hard into the polished mahogany wall. The impact knocked the breath from Desmond's lungs in a loud, wet wheeze. The encrypted mobile terminal flew from his manicured hands, clattering across the floor and spinning wildly until it slammed against the baseboard. Agent Reyes smoothly twisted Desmond's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees and snapping a pair of heavy tactical zip ties around his wrists. Desmond thrashed against the floorboards, his bespoke suit tearing at the shoulder seam. He began shouting frantically that he was a sovereign corporate officer demanding his legal counsel, but the physical struggle was meaningless. The damage was already permanently done. The liquidation sequence Desmond had triggered was completely autonomous and highly aggressive. Behind me, the massive Vanguard media console began to scream. It was not a metaphorical alarm. The proprietary trading terminals mounted along the boardroom walls, which had been actively synced to the Caldwell asset portfolio to monitor liquidity during the merger, instantly detected the catastrophic capital flight. A piercing, high-pitched siren blared through the integrated security speakers, a sound specifically designed to alert floor traders to a terminal market crash. The 80-inch monitor dominating the room shifted from the neon green of my forensic tracking software to a violent, strobing crimson red. Warning banners cascaded down the display in a relentless digital waterfall. The numbers on the screen were spinning backward so fast they blurred into a solid white block. Desmond's override had completely drained the Caldwell Liquid Trust. $600 million in tethered foundational assets were fracturing into thousands of untraceable microtransactions, bleeding out into a decentralized anonymous crypto network. Because the holding company relied heavily on that exact trust fund to collateralize its massive corporate debt, the entire financial architecture of Caldwell Holdings inverted in a fraction of a second. A secondary, deeper alarm sounded vibrating through the floorboards. A massive pop-up window overrode the Vanguard system, originating directly from the primary lending banks. The banking algorithms had automatically triggered a failsafe. The screen flashed with massive, undeniable text. Margin call initiated. I stood perfectly still at the console and watched the live feed of a dynasty dying. The banking system was instantly seizing all physical assets tied to the Caldwell name to cover the sudden massive deficit. The sprawling estate in Atlanta was locked down. The corporate high-rises were frozen. The fleet of private jets, the luxury vehicle accounts, and the highly guarded private investment portfolios were instantly slated for federal auction. The billions of dollars of generational wealth that had protected Desmond, shielded Beatrice, and funded Vanessa's vanity projects simply ceased to exist in the span of 30 seconds. Beatrice Caldwell stood frozen at the end of the conference table. The regal, untouchable aura she had worn her entire life shattered into jagged, irreparable pieces. She stared blankly as the crimson numbers plummeted to zero. Her personal cell phone began to vibrate violently in the pocket of her slate gray designer suit. It was her private wealth manager. She fumbled frantically to retrieve the device, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it. The phone cracked against the hard marble floor, the speakerphone activating on impact. A frantic, panicked voice leaked out into the silent room, screaming that her black cards were declining, the accounts were locked, and federal regulators were storming their Atlanta offices. The realization hit Beatrice with the physical force of a freight train. The money was gone. The generational legacy she had compromised, every moral boundary to protect, was erased. She was entirely destitute. Beatrice let out a guttural, suffocating gasp. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed hard onto the marble floor of the Vanguard boardroom. As she hit the ground, her exclusive custom-made designer handbag slipped from her shoulder. The gold clasp snapped open upon impact, spilling her pristine life across the floor. Gold-embossed country club membership cards, diamond-studded compacts, and platinum credit cards that were now effectively useless plastic scattered across the polished stone. She did not try to gather her belongings. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, her expensive suit bunching awkwardly as she crawled across the floor toward me. The woman who had spent years treating me like an infectious disease, the woman who had just attempted to frame me for a $90 million federal crime, was now weeping uncontrollably. Her perfectly applied mascara ran in thick black rivers down her cheeks. She reached out and grasped the hem of my ruined silk wedding dress, her knuckles white with absolute desperation. "Please, Nia," Beatrice wailed, her voice a hysterical, breathless screech. She pointed a trembling finger toward the flashing red monitor. "You built that tracking software. You know how to trace the money. You know how to hack the mainframes. You can override his command. You can freeze the wallets before the transfers clear." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman clawing at my feet. I did not move an inch. I let her cling to my jacket as her sobs echoed off the glass walls. "Please, Nia." Beatrice sobbed, her voice echoing off the glass walls, entirely devoid of her usual cultured superiority. "Do not let him do this. If that margin call executes fully, we are ruined. We will lose our country club memberships, our home, everything. You cannot let this happen. You are family." I stared down at her, processing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words. She had just marched into a boardroom with a forged confession designed to lock me in a federal penitentiary for decades. She had blackmailed her own son, preying on his trauma and loyalty to secure her own survival. She had orchestrated a vicious social smear campaign to ensure I would never work in my industry again. And now, as the inevitable consequences of her own blind arrogance tore her empire apart, she dared to invoke the word family. She dared to mourn her country club status, while her eldest son lay restrained on the floor facing a federal indictment. I gently but firmly pulled the stained silk fabric of my wedding dress out of her desperate grip. I took a single step back, severing the physical connection between us. I looked down at her tear-streaked face, my expression entirely devoid of sympathy, anger, or pity. I felt nothing but a cold, absolute clarity. "Family doesn't ask you to sit at a different table." I stated, my voice perfectly level, carrying the heavy weight of years of quiet endurance. I gestured toward the scattered, useless platinum credit cards on the floor. "Try Uber, Beatrice." The words struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, uncontrollable sobs. But while Beatrice broke under the weight of her reality, Vanessa ignited. Vanessa had been standing near the edge of the obsidian conference table, watching her entire universe collapse in real time. Her secret offshore shell companies had been exposed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The massive $2 billion Vanguard merger was officially dead. Her husband had just abandoned her to face federal charges alone, taking whatever crypto assets he managed to steal with him. She was facing decades in federal prison, and the unlimited wealth she had married into had evaporated in front of her eyes. She realized with terrifying clarity that she was the designated scapegoat. She had nothing left to lose, and the aristocratic mask she wore so carefully completely disintegrated. A low, animalistic scream tore from Vanessa's throat. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She kicked off her emerald green designer heels and leaped directly onto the massive obsidian conference table. Vanguard executives scattered in panic, diving out of their expensive leather chairs as Vanessa charged across the polished surface. She kicked over crystal water pitchers and scattered the blue-backed legal documents into the air, her eyes locked dead on me. She lunged off the edge of the table, her hands outstretched like claws aiming directly for my throat. She intended to physically tear me apart right in the middle of the boardroom. I braced myself, shifting my weight to intercept her attack, my hands coming up in a firm defensive guard. Agent Miller shouted a harsh warning, stepping rapidly forward to intercept her trajectory. But just as Vanessa's manicured hands reached for the lapels of my tailored black blazer, a thunderous noise stopped the chaos cold. The heavy oak double doors of the boardroom swung violently open, crashing against the interior walls with a deafening boom. Vanessa froze in midair, her momentum halting as every single person in the room turned toward the entrance. Standing in the threshold was Richard Caldwell. He was not the incapacitated, dementia-riddled invalid Desmond and Beatrice had painted him to be. He was standing tall, leaning heavily on a solid brass-tipped cane, dressed in a sharp, immaculate midnight blue suit. His eyes were clear, incredibly sharp, and burning with a completely lucid, terrifying authority. Flanking him on either side, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts, were 4 heavily armed United States federal marshals. The entire Vanguard boardroom froze as if submerged in liquid nitrogen. Desmond stumbled backward, his shoulders hitting the mahogany wall with a dull thud. The color drained completely from his face, leaving behind a sickly, chalky white. He stared at the man in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Richard Caldwell stepped into the room. Every movement he made was deliberate and commanding. The brass tip of his cane struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, resonant crack that echoed through the sudden silence. He did not look like a man suffering from severe cognitive decline. He looked like the ruthless corporate titan who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up. Desmond finally found his voice, though it emerged as a pathetic, high-pitched stammer. "Dad, you are supposed to be in the care facility. The doctor said you could not leave the secure wing." Richard stopped at the head of the obsidian table. He looked down at his eldest son with an expression of absolute disgust. He raised his cane and brought it down hard against the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "I stepped back to see if you would build the legacy or burn it, Desmond." Richard stated, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that commanded absolute submission. "You chose to burn it. You colluded with corrupt physicians. You forged medical evaluations to steal my power of attorney. You siphoned hundreds of millions of dollars from the company I built to fund your pathetic vanity projects. And when you were caught, you tried to destroy your own brother and frame his innocent wife. But you underestimated the woman your brother married." Richard turned his piercing gaze toward me, offering a single respectful nod. It was the first time the patriarch of the Caldwell family had ever looked at me as an equal. Desmond realized with crushing clarity that he was completely cornered. The FBI had his financial records. The federal marshals were physically blocking the main exits. His father was lucid and fully in control of the holding company. The Vanguard executives were actively backing away from him, treating him like radioactive waste. But Desmond was a cornered animal, and cornered animals lash out with everything they have left. Desmond let out a sharp, manic laugh. He pushed himself off the wall, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his breathing shallow and rapid. "You think you have won," Desmond sneered, pointing a shaking finger at his father. "You think you can just walk in here, revoke the power of attorney, and save the company. You are too late, old man. You are completely out of time." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You have nothing left to leverage, Desmond. Agent Miller has already secured the liquidation traces. You are going to federal prison. I am not going anywhere, Desmond shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. Because Caldwell Holdings no longer owns its most valuable assets. I knew this merger might fall through. I knew Julian might lose his nerve, so I secured a secondary buyer. Last night, acting under the legal authority of the power of attorney you granted me, I signed the entire Caldwell intellectual property portfolio over to the Kalen Syndicate. Harrison Vance, the Vanguard, CEO, stopped dead in his tracks. The few executives who were still packing their briefcases froze. A wave of genuine terror washed over the corporate professionals. The Kalen Syndicate was not a legitimate investment firm. They were a ruthless offshore shadow syndicate known for hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and dismantling acquired companies with brutal, often violent efficiency. They did not operate within the bounds of international law. You sold our intellectual property to criminals, Richard demanded, his voice dropping dangerously low. I sold them everything. Desmond fired back, a twisted smile forming on his face. The manufacturing patents, the supply chain logistics, and most importantly, Nia's forensic tracking software. The syndicate specifically wanted her algorithm. They paid a massive premium for it. The ink is dry. The contracts are registered in an offshore jurisdiction that the SEC cannot touch. If Vanguard does not absorb our debt right now, the syndicate will rip Caldwell Holdings apart, piece by piece, to extract their value. Desmond looked directly at Harrison Vance. Merge with us right now, Vance. Absorb the company, pay off the syndicate, and you get the software. If you walk away, the syndicate will tear this family to shreds to get what I promised them. Vance did not hesitate. He snapped his briefcase shut with absolute finality. Vanguard does not negotiate with shadow syndicates. This deal is dead. We are leaving. The Vanguard team moved swiftly toward the secondary exit, terrified of any association with international organized crime. Desmond's desperate ploy to force the merger had failed completely. The syndicate was coming to collect, and they would demand the software Desmond had legally promised them. Vanessa, who had been standing frozen on top of the conference table after her failed attack on me, suddenly burst into a triumphant, chilling laugh. She climbed down from the table, smoothing her ruined skirt. She reached into her designer portfolio and pulled out a thick, legal-sized document printed on heavy ivory paper. She marched straight toward me, waving the document in the air like a weapon. The aristocratic arrogance had fully returned to her face. Desmond is entirely correct. Vanessa smirked, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. You cannot save this company, Nia. You cannot save Julian. And you certainly cannot save yourself. Everything you built while living in our penthouses belongs to Caldwell Holdings. It is ours. She slammed the document down onto the obsidian table right in front of me. It was an ironclad, incredibly restrictive non-compete and intellectual property assignment contract. You signed this the day you married Julian, Vanessa gloated, tapping her manicured acrylic nail against the signature line. It explicitly states that any software algorithms or digital architecture you develop while residing on Caldwell properties or utilizing Caldwell networks is the sole and exclusive property of Caldwell Holdings. Desmond had the legal right to sell your code. The syndicate owns your life's work. You have absolutely nothing. I looked down at the contract. The signature at the bottom was a flawless forgery of my handwriting. Beatrice and Vanessa had planned this perfectly. They had fabricated a legal net designed to strip me of my only defense. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They believed the syndicate would take my software, leaving me empty-handed and vulnerable. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached forward and pushed the forged contract off the edge of the table. It fluttered uselessly to the floor, landing next to Beatrice's discarded platinum cards. I stepped up to the main media console. I typed a rapid sequence of commands into the keyboard, bypassing the Vanguard security warnings. The massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room shifted once again. The flashing red margin call warnings disappeared. In their place, a crisp, high-definition digital document appeared on the screen. It was not a corporate contract. It bore the official, unmistakable seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. You really should have done your due diligence, Vanessa, I said, my voice cutting through the silent boardroom with razor-sharp precision. I pressed a button to magnify the center of the document. My software's core algorithm is not a recent development, I explained, addressing the entire room. It is a highly specialized, self-evolving code. I named it Maya 7 after my late mother. She taught me how to code when I was 10 years old. I perfected the base architecture long before I ever met your family. I pointed to the highlighted text on the massive screen. The date was clearly visible, stamped in bold black ink by the federal government. The patent is time-stamped 4 years before I ever met Julian, I stated, locking eyes with Vanessa, watching the triumphant smirk melt off her face. And it is time-stamped 2 years before I ever stepped foot in your racist elitist country club. Caldwell Holdings never owned my software. Desmond sold the syndicate an empty box. Vanessa stared at the screen, her jaw dropping open. She looked down at the forged contract on the floor, then back up at the federal patent. Her legal threat was entirely fabricated and completely useless. I owned my intellectual property outright, protected by prior federal registration. Desmond stood paralyzed by the wall. The color rushed out of his face so fast he looked as though he might pass out. His breathing became incredibly shallow. His eyes darted wildly from the federal patent on the screen to the federal marshals standing by the doors. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with devastating force. He had promised a ruthless, violent international shadow syndicate a piece of proprietary software that he did not actually own. He had taken their money. He had signed the contracts. And now he had absolutely nothing to give them. The Kalen syndicate did not utilize corporate litigation to settle bad debts. They utilized kinetic physical retaliation. Desmond realized he was no longer just facing federal embezzlement charges. He was facing a syndicate hit squad, and he had stripped his family of the financial resources required to hire private security. He had burned his own fortress to the ground. Panic, pure and unfiltered, consumed him. He let out a sharp, terrified sound. He shoved himself off the wall, his eyes wide and manic. He did not look at his father. He did not look at his mother, who was still sobbing quietly on the floor. He lunged forward and grabbed Vanessa roughly by the arm. "We have to go," Desmond hissed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "They are going to kill us. We have to leave right now." Vanessa stumbled, crying out in pain as Desmond yanked her forward. He did not wait for the federal marshals or Agent Reyes to react. Operating on pure adrenaline-fueled survival instinct, Desmond shoved his wife ahead of him, barreling toward the secondary catering doors at the far end of the boardroom. He hit the swinging doors with his shoulder, shattering the hinges. He was not heading for the main elevators. He was heading straight for the service corridors, desperate to reach the Vanguard private airstrip to flee the country before the syndicate realized they had been played. Vanessa hit the polished floorboards hard, her momentum entirely derailed by the booming arrival of the patriarch. She stumbled, her emerald green dress twisting around her legs, and scrambled backward away from me. The sheer, unadulterated fury that had consumed her face just seconds prior was instantly replaced by a stark, trembling terror. Every single person in the Vanguard boardroom was frozen perfectly still, their eyes locked on the doorway. Richard Caldwell stepped into the room. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, the heavy brass tip of his cane striking the marble threshold with a resonant cracking thud. He was supposed to be sedated in a secure memory care wing, his mind completely erased by advanced dementia. That was the narrative Desmond had sold to the board, the media, and the banking syndicates. But the man standing before us possessed eyes that were terrifyingly sharp. They burned with a lucid, predatory intelligence. The 4 United States federal marshals fanned out immediately, securing the heavy oak doors and blocking the primary exit. Their hands rested firmly on their tactical belts. The message was absolute. No one was leaving this room. Desmond remained pinned against the far mahogany wall by Agent Reyes, his hands zip-tied behind his back. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at his father, his jaw working silently, unable to force a single syllable past his terror-constricted throat. Richard did not look at his eldest son. He did not look at Beatrice, who was still weeping pathetically on the floor amidst her scattered credit cards. He looked directly at Vanguard CEO Harrison Vance, who was currently cowering behind his leather executive chair. "Mr. Vance," Richard stated, his deep rumbling voice commanding the absolute silence of the room, "I am formally advising you that the medical power of attorney Desmond Caldwell presented to your legal team is a fraudulent document. The physicians who signed it are currently in federal custody. I am the sole majority shareholder of Caldwell Holdings, and I am officially terminating this merger." Vance nodded frantically, his face glistening with cold sweat. He signaled for his legal team to back away from the obsidian conference table. The Vanguard executives scrambled to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Caldwell family. Desmond finally found his voice, a pathetic, high-pitched stammer that echoed off the glass walls. "Dad, you do not understand. I had to do it. The company was drowning in debt. The margin calls were coming. I was trying to save our legacy." Richard slowly turned his head. The look of pure, concentrated disgust he leveled at Desmond was devastating. "You were trying to save your vanity projects, Desmond," Richard fired back, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "You hollowed out the foundational trusts. You siphoned billions into offshore ghost accounts. You colluded with a criminal syndicate to sell off our intellectual property. You did not build a legacy. You orchestrated a heist." Desmond thrashed weakly against Agent Reyes. "I secured a buyer!" Desmond screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "The Kalen Syndicate. They wired the capital. They bought the proprietary software. If you kill this merger, the syndicate will tear us apart. They own Nia's tracking algorithm now. It is done." Vanessa, who had been shrinking back toward the edge of the room, suddenly stopped. Her eyes darted from her restrained husband to the federal marshals, and then finally to me. The raw survivalist panic in her mind rapidly coalesced into a desperate, malicious final strategy. She was facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. She needed leverage. She needed a weapon. Vanessa straightened her posture. She smoothed the front of her ruined designer dress, forcing the aristocratic arrogance back onto her face. She walked over to her overturned leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, ivory-colored legal folio. She marched back toward the center of the boardroom, her heels clicking aggressively against the floorboards. She slapped the document down onto the obsidian table, sliding it directly across the polished surface until it stopped inches from my hands. She looked at me with a chilling, triumphant smirk. "Desmond is absolutely right," Vanessa sneered, waving her hand over the document. "You think you have outsmarted us, Nia. You think you are the brilliant architect who dismantled our empire, but you are nothing but a naive amateur playing a corporate game you do not understand." She tapped her manicured acrylic nail against the signature line of the document. "This is an ironclad, unbreachable non-compete and intellectual property assignment clause," Vanessa declared, projecting her voice so the federal agents and her father-in-law could hear every word. "You signed this the week you married Julian and moved into the family estate. It explicitly states that any software, digital architecture, or proprietary algorithms you develop, modify, or conceptualize while residing on Caldwell property belongs entirely to the holding company." Vanessa leaned across the table, her eyes wide and manic with a vicious delight. "Everything you built while living in our penthouses belongs to Caldwell Holdings. It is ours. Desmond had the full legal authority to sell your code to the syndicate. They own your tracking software. They own your life's work. You have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at the contract resting on the table. The signature at the bottom was a flawless forgery of my handwriting. It was a masterpiece of corporate manipulation. Beatrice and Vanessa had likely spent weeks fabricating this document with highly paid, unethical lawyers, creating a legal net designed to strip me of my only defense. They genuinely believed they had checkmated me. They believed they could feed my software to a violent international crime syndicate and leave me empty-handed to take the fall. I did not panic. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached out and calmly pushed the forged contract off the edge of the table. It fluttered uselessly through the air, landing in a crumpled heap on the floor. I turned my back on Vanessa and stepped up to the primary Vanguard media console. The massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room was still flashing the violent crimson warnings of the active margin call. I bypassed the Vanguard security firewall with a rapid sequence of keystrokes. I opened a secure encrypted tunnel directly to my private server. "You really should have done your due diligence, Vanessa," I said, my voice perfectly level ringing through the silent boardroom with absolute authority. "If you are going to forge a corporate theft, you must verify the origin of the asset." I typed a final decisive command and hit enter. The massive screen shifted instantly. The red warnings vanished. In their place, a crisp, high-definition digital document illuminated the room. It bore the heavy, unmistakable seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the screen. "My software's core algorithm is not a recent development," I stated, locking eyes with Vanessa, watching the smug, triumphant smile begin to melt off her face. "It is a highly specialized, self-evolving code. I perfected the base architecture a very long time ago. I named it Maya 7 after my late mother. She taught me the fundamentals of programming when I was a child." I picked up a laser pointer from the console and highlighted a specific line of text on the massive screen. The date was magnified, stamped in bold black ink by the federal government, establishing undeniable legal ownership. "The patent is time-stamped 4 years before I ever met Julian," I announced, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "And it is time-stamped 2 years before I ever stepped foot in your racist, elitist country club. I owned the proprietary rights to Maya 7 long before I even knew the Caldwell name existed. Your holding company never owned a single line of my code." Vanessa stared at the screen, her jaw dropping open. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She looked down at the forged contract on the floor, then back up at the federal patent dominating the wall. Her legal threat was entirely fabricated and completely useless. I owned my intellectual property outright, protected by prior federal registration. Desmond's forged sale to the Kalin Syndicate was legally void. He had sold them a phantom asset. He had sold them an empty box. Desmond stood paralyzed against the mahogany wall. The sheer crushing reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. He stopped struggling against his plastic restraints. His breathing became incredibly rapid, a frantic, shallow wheezing that echoed in the quiet room. His eyes darted wildly from the federal patent on the screen to the federal marshals standing by the doors. The Kalin Syndicate was not a legitimate investment firm that would settle a contract dispute in a civil courtroom. They were a ruthless, violent shadow syndicate known for international corporate espionage and brutal retaliations. They did not care about U.S. Patent Office timestamps. They cared about the capital they had wired to Desmond's offshore accounts. Desmond had promised them the most advanced forensic tracking software on the planet. He had taken their money, and now he realized with absolute terrifying clarity that he had absolutely nothing to give them. The syndicate would not sue him. They would hunt him down and dissect him. They would extract their pound of flesh, and he had just stripped his own family of the financial resources required to hire private security. He had burned his own fortress to the ground, and the wolves were already at the door. Desmond realized that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was no longer his biggest problem. Federal prison offered solitary confinement and armed guards. The syndicate offered a shallow grave. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. Panic, pure, unfiltered, animalistic panic completely consumed him. Desmond let out a sharp, guttural scream. Operating on a surge of pure adrenaline, he violently twisted his body, throwing his weight against Agent Reyes. The sudden, desperate movement caught the federal agent off guard. Desmond broke free, his zip-tied hands straining against his lower back. He did not run for the main oak doors where the federal marshals stood. He lunged wildly across the room, his eyes wide and manic, heading straight for his wife. He slammed his shoulder into Vanessa, knocking the breath out of her lungs. Before she could scream, Desmond grabbed the fabric of her sleeve with his teeth and his contorted shoulder, practically tackling her toward the secondary catering doors at the far end of the boardroom. "Move," Desmond hissed, his voice cracking with absolute unhinged terror. They are going to kill us! The syndicate is going to kill us! We have to run! He shoved Vanessa hard against the swinging doors. The heavy frosted glass shattered upon impact, raining sharp fragments across the floorboards. Desmond bolted through the broken threshold, dragging his stumbling wife behind him into the dimly lit service corridor. Agent Miller shouted a rapid command, his hand flying to his radio as he sprinted after them, but Desmond was moving with the blind, frantic momentum of a hunted animal. He was not heading for the Vanguard lobby. He knew the building's architecture. He was heading straight down the subterranean service tunnels, desperate to reach the Vanguard private airstrip. He had a chartered jet waiting, and he intended to flee the country before the syndicate realized they had been played. The heavy catering doors swung wildly on their broken hinges, the sound of shattered glass crunching under Agent Miller's tactical boots as he and two marshals charged into the service corridor in pursuit. The chaos of their sudden departure left the boardroom ringing with a frantic, echoing silence. Beatrice Caldwell remained on the floor, her hands covering her face, weeping into the cold marble. She did not look up as her golden child fled the room, like a common fugitive, leaving her behind to face the ruins of their empire. The Vanguard executives remained huddled together, terrified and entirely silent, watching the dynasty disintegrate before their eyes. Richard Caldwell did not move to follow his son. He stood perfectly still near the head of the obsidian table, leaning heavily on his brass-tipped cane. He stared at the shattered glass scattered across the threshold, his expression carved from granite. He watched the man he had groomed to inherit billions choose the path of a coward, abandoning his family, his company, and his dignity in a desperate bid to outrun his own corruption. Richard slowly turned away from the broken doors. He looked at the massive monitor, the federal patent for Maya 7 glowing brightly in the dim room, a digital monument to my absolute victory. He had spent his entire life building a legacy, and it had been saved by the one person his family had tried so desperately to destroy. The sirens began to wail outside the Vanguard high-rise, the shrill sound cutting through the thick glass windows. Desmond and Vanessa were running out of time, sprinting blindly toward the private airstrip, completely unaware that the real storm was already waiting for them on the tarmac. Agent Miller stepped forward, his eyes flicking from the digital recorder in Vanessa's outstretched hand to Desmond's horrifyingly pale face. He took the silver device, securing it inside a plastic evidence bag. Desmond let out a sound that was barely human, a hollow, suffocating gasp of absolute defeat. The man who had spent his entire life manipulating, threatening, and buying his way out of consequences finally hit a wall he could not bribe. He dropped to his knees on the wet, rain-slicked asphalt, the fight entirely drained from his body, leaving nothing but an empty, terrified shell. The federal agents moved in swiftly, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping the heavy steel handcuffs shut. The sharp metallic click echoed across the airstrip, completely drowning out the roar of the idling jet engines. Richard Caldwell did not blink. He stood tall against the howling wind, leaning on his brass-tipped cane, watching the authorities drag his golden child toward the back of an armored SUV. Julian stepped close to me, weaving his fingers securely through mine. The storm raged around us, washing the tarmac clean, signaling the definitive end of the Caldwell reign of terror. Fast forward exactly 1 month. The fallout from that night on the airstrip was surgical, relentless, and absolutely comprehensive. The federal government, armed with Vanessa's audio recordings and the forensic data I provided, seized every single asset tied to Desmond's fraudulent offshore holding structures. The sprawling luxury penthouses in downtown Chicago were foreclosed upon and immediately locked down by federal regulators. Beatrice Caldwell, the once untouchable matriarch of high society, faced the brutal reality of an eviction notice. Her prestigious country club memberships were permanently revoked due to the scandal. Her seemingly infinite bank accounts were frozen and drained to pay off the massive corporate restitution fines. Stripped of her custom designer suits and her aristocratic superiority, she was forced to move into a cramped, highly supervised assisted living facility. Richard provided a microscopic monthly stipend out of sheer legal obligation, ensuring she would never again possess the financial leverage to ruin another person's life. Vanessa did not fare much better. The federal prosecutors granted her a highly conditional plea deal in exchange for her direct testimony against both Desmond and the Kalin syndicate. But immunity from a federal prison sentence did not equate to immunity from poverty. The government systematically dismantled her secret shell companies and seized her hidden offshore assets. She was left entirely destitute, carrying the radioactive stigma of a federal informant. I saw her active listings online just last week. The woman who had proudly stood on top of an obsidian boardroom table, intending to tear me apart to protect her wealth, was now desperately auctioning off her scratched Hermes Birkin bags and scuffed emerald heels on a discount resale application. She was selling off the armor of her former life just to scrape together the security deposit for a tiny, unrenovated studio apartment in the deep outer suburbs. Desmond was denied bail. Labeled a severe flight risk with deep ties to an international criminal enterprise, he remained locked inside a maximum security federal detention center. He sat in an austere concrete cell awaiting a trial that would inevitably end in a decades-long sentence. The Kalin syndicate was dismantled by a joint international task force using the exact evidence Vanessa had surrendered. Desmond had absolutely nothing left to leverage. He had no money, no wife, no father, and no legacy. He was a ghost. Julian and I walked together through the sunlit, soaring atrium of our newly rebranded corporate headquarters. We had decisively stripped the Caldwell name from the building facade, replacing it with a sleek, modernized identity that represented transparency, integrity, and innovation. Julian looked healthier and more vibrant than he had in years. The heavy, suffocating weight of his family's toxic expectations was permanently gone, replaced by a profound sense of freedom. With my full backing as the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer, Julian took complete, uncontested control of the architectural division. He immediately scrapped Desmond's bloated elite vanity projects, canceling the luxury golf resorts and exclusive high-rises. Instead, Julian redirected the firm's massive resources toward designing and developing sustainable, affordable housing communities across the Midwest. He was finally utilizing his extraordinary talents to build up the very people his family had spent generations looking down upon. He found his true driving purpose in watching him passionately outline blueprints for community centers and accessible green spaces was a quiet, beautiful victory. I walked into the primary executive suite and took my rightful seat at the head of the massive obsidian boardroom table. The room that had once served as the staging ground for my destruction was now the command center of my thriving empire. I sat there breathing in the quiet power of the space, a self-made black woman who refused to be broken by elitism, gaslighting, or corporate sabotage. I had willingly entered their toxic matrix, deciphered their hidden source code, and completely rewritten the rules of the game. I looked down at the pristine surface of my glass desk. Resting carefully next to my secondary monitor was a framed photograph. It was a picture taken on the afternoon of my ruined wedding day, capturing the exact moment the dark storm clouds broke over the sprawling Atlanta estate. It was a wedding that had ended in absolute, undeniable disaster, but it was the necessary catalyst that ultimately birthed an empire. The Vanguard merger was successfully restructured entirely on my terms. My forensic tracking software, Maya 7, was officially adopted as the gold standard for federal financial security protocols, generating legitimate, unassailable wealth. I did not need to forge legal documents or tear other people down to secure my place in the world. My brilliance and my unyielding spine had been enough. I closed my silver laptop with a soft, deeply satisfying click. I picked up my porcelain cup, feeling the soothing warmth of the chamomile tea against the palms of my hands. I took a slow, deliberate sip, looking out through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, vibrant city skyline stretched out below me. The ultimate sweet revenge is total, undeniable success.